All right, our recording has started. So welcome everyone to today's local government education program provided by University of Illinois Extension. My name is Lisa Merrifield, and I'm a Community and Economic Development Specialist at University of Illinois and your moderator for today. So in today's webinar, we're going to be hearing more from Illinois EPA about their financial assistance programs for water quality and watershed management in Illinois communities. This is the second webinar in a quarterly series we're planning with Illinois EPA. And specifically today, we're going to talk about grant funding and watershed-based planning for pollution control, which you may know as the 319 grant program. Our speakers are Christine Davis and David Southern. Christine is the manager of the Watershed Management section in the Bureau of Water at Illinois EPA's Springfield headquarters, and David is an environmental protection specialist with Illinois EPA. With that, Chris and David, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lisa, and good morning, everyone. As Lisa stated, this is the second in a series of water quality and watershed protection financial assistance programs that are available at the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. And the Section 319 program has been part of the agency's financial program since the early 1990s. And in fact, we've either crossed the threshold or soon will have put out over $100 million in Section 319 funds to assist applicants to implement non-point source programs. Okay. This session is going to cover the Illinois Non-Point Source Management Program, the what, where, and how, Gata, Grant Accountability and Transparency Act, also affectionately known as Gata, give you an overview of the Section 319 program, give you some deeper insight into watershed-based planning. We'll wrap up with some tips for successful applications and then do some final questions and answers if we haven't totally overwhelmed you with all of the information that we have available for the Section 319 program. Okay. So the Illinois Non-Point Source Management Program, which was last fully updated in 2013, guides the non-point source pollution control efforts throughout Illinois. Not just what Illinois EPA does, but what other state and federal agencies do, what local government does, what individual citizens can do. It's about a 200-page document, and it goes through everything from what is non-point source pollution to how you go about applying for Section 319 funds and what's eligible, what's not. It also gives the milestones of what the program is set up for. It definitely does include a chapter that guides the Section 319 grant program. And this information, we follow US EPA's guidance on the Section 319 program because Section 319 is of the Clean Water Act, and it is federal funds. Now in Illinois, non-point source impaired waters that without additional non-point source pollution control implementation, there's almost 61% of the assessed streams in Illinois that will not meet their water quality goals, and over 98% of the assessed lakes in Illinois which will not meet their water quality goals. Now the water quality goals might be for drinking water supply, industrial use, primary or secondary contacts such as recreation. And the thing to identify there is the word assessed in both of those facts there. The agency can't get out to every stream mile or lake acre that's in Illinois. So what we do is we take the information from a subset of streams and lakes and look at that as in terms of water quality and see where impairment isn't happening. I should also say that the Illinois Non-Point Source Management Program and the Section 319 grant program also help deal with non-point source pollution control for groundwater issues. What is non-point source pollution? Probably 3/4 of you on the call are aware of what it is. For someone who isn't, this does include pollution caused by rainfall or snow melt, moving over and through the ground and carrying both natural and human-made pollutants into our lakes, rivers, streams, wetlands, and groundwater. Atmospheric deposition and hydrologic modifications are also sources of non-point source pollution. Hydrologic modification could be things like stream channelization, removal of wetlands or filling in wetlands. There's a lot of information in the Illinois Non-Point Source Management Program that can give you more details if you want to learn more about this. Where's non-point source pollution and what are the sources? The map that's there on the left side of the screen are the streams and rivers only that are identified as impaired by non-point source pollution. Chances are some of those streams and rivers are also impacted by point sources as well. But what you'll see basically is the entire state of Illinois has a non-point source pollution control problem. And we've been, again, trying to address it since the early 90s. And we struggle because there's basically anything that people are doing out in a watershed, whether it's working, living, or playing, has the potential to create non-point source pollution if we aren't paying attention to what we're doing. Now, the sources of non-point source pollution include, in Illinois, agricultural runoff, construction site runoff, urban, like stormwater runoff, hydrologic modifications, and even resource extraction. Those are the major sources of non-point source for both surface water and groundwater resources. How do you control non-point source pollution using Section 319 grant funding? And if I was a comedian, I would say you do it very slowly, unfortunately, but I'm not supposed to be a comedian on this, so I'm just going to walk away from that. The categories that we have, if you look at the US EPA guidelines and what the Section 319 funds can be used for, in 2013, US EPA came back to all of the states and said, we really want you to focus on development of watershed-based plans, and we want to focus even more on the implementation of those watershed-based plans. So we do have some non-planning development and non-planning implementation Section 319 projects that happen, but it's got to be a really good project that has prepped over some of the priority work in order to get funded. Now, when you're looking at implementation of a watershed-based plan, it's not just the BMPs or the conservation practices that people are including. Watershed-based plans can include outreach and information. It can include both environmental and social monitoring, of course, the best management practices, but it can also be things like capacity building for individual landowners, local government, local partners, to help them further the cause of non-point source pollution control. Okay, as far as who's eligible for the Section 319 grant program, I've taken you into the Grant Accountability and Transparency Act, also known as Gata, and the topic for that, because the state of Illinois, since about 2015, has been pursuing a more improved system for grant accountability and transparency. They're trying very hard to work with all of the state agencies that implement both state and federal grant funds and trying to get consistent with you as an applicant seeing the same type of grant application, whether you're applying to Illinois EPA, Department of Natural Resources, Department of Transportation there. So there's improvements that are being made in consistency, but the process is somewhat frustrating if you've been living it as it's been evolving over the last 6 or 7 years. Now, the thing that's important to know about Gata and the Grant Accountability and Transparency Act, or one of the important things, is that you as an applicant must be pre-qualified through the Gata portal in order to apply for the Section 319 program that we're talking about today. And in the near future, for any of the Illinois EPA notice of funding opportunities that will be posted. The system is again improving, and they've tried to automate it so that there's going to be easier questions for you to answer and giving you warnings and things like, hey, you're running out of time to get the application submitted, get it in now, or your application won't be considered for funding. And then on the agency side of it, it's going to save us quite a bit of time on the information coming in and being routed directly into a database versus us having to go ahead and re-enter the data from the information that you've provided. Now, in order to pre-qualify through the Gata portal, you do have to go in and follow the authentication process. There's a grantee registration process, a grantee pre-qualification, and then there's also fiscal and administrative risk assessments and programmatic risk assessments that happen prior to anyone actually getting a grant agreement. And again, the bottom line there on this slide says Illinois EPA and Watershed Management Section grant notice of funding opportunities and their corresponding applications will now be completed through Amplifund in the Gata portal. But the other thing that I want you to think about as an applicant, now if you're a municipality, a local unit of government, or somebody that's been receiving grants from state agencies, you're probably already in the Gata portal and are living the experience of quite a bit of paperwork regarding reporting, auditing, additional documentation on things like indirect costs and that. If you're a smaller organization that doesn't necessarily have staff or doesn't have a whole lot of budget to go to, you may not want to apply for the grants that the state has due to the Gata process. We've got some tiny grants out there where the applicant might have spent as much on trying to be eligible in the Gata portal as they would have to be eligible in the Gata portal. So if you're a smaller project and again don't have a lot of resources, it might be more appropriate for you to reach out and find a local partner that would be willing to enter in and submit your application for you. You would become a subcontractor to them. But if that's your situation, please give a call to the agency. We can give you some ideas of some local groups that are already participating in the Gata portal that might be a potential partner. The other thing with that is that whomever we recommend you to consider working with might be able to provide some additional match that will help relieve some of the pressure on you as a applicant to provide all of the match on your own. Okay, the grant application process in the Gata portal starts off with a notice of funding opportunity being posted. For the Section 319 grant, we're hoping that it's going to get posted in the next 2 weeks. We're physically learning or mentally learning the AmpliFund system and trying to make sure that we get everything in the right order, asked in the right way, because once we take that notice of funding opportunity live, we cannot modify it, or we have to close the whole thing and have everybody reapply. So we posted the notice of funding opportunity. Say we go ahead and do that June 1st. You as an applicant need to pre-register. The state goes through and does a background check on you to see that you're an eligible applicant. This is going to be, most people are going to go ahead and apply for it, but you're looking at, are you registered and have an FEIN number? Do you have the Duns and Bradstreet number? Do you have a sam.gov cage code number? And if you don't know what those are, we can talk about those at the end of the end of the presentation. The application and budget get submitted through the AmpliFund for, again, this new project or NOFO that's coming up. The agency then reviews the applications, ranks the project according to the criterion that's identified in the notice of funding opportunity, develops a work plan, which we submit to US EPA to get their approval saying, yes, we're in agreement that what Illinois EPA is proposing as the projects that should be funded under this fiscal year is still appropriate. The applicant would then be completing the fiscal and administrative and the programmatic risk assessments once we've identified to them that, hey, Illinois EPA and US EPA are endorsing your project for funding. And then once the applicant has done the fiscal and administrative programmatic risk assessment, normally a notice of state award, which is non-binding, would be released through the Gata portal to you as the grantee. And that lists out information like, here's what the grant award would be, here's your match requirement, here's the proposed start and end date, and some other conditions that are specific to the answers that you submitted in the fiscal and administrative or programmatic risk assessment. Once the local group approves the notice of state award, then the agency goes ahead and develops the grant agreement, which is then executed by the agency and the grantee. At that point in time, the grantee would be able to begin work on the project. Now, for applications that were submitted last, for applications that will be submitted in this August, if things are going well and I can keep my workload flowing well, we would see grants being executed late summer, early fall of 2023. So there's quite a bit of time between the point that an application comes in and an executed grant agreement comes out. Okay, so what to expect if you do get funded? Again, there's a financial assistance agreement that's made. There's Gata management throughout the agreement period. There's also product development, and for this slide, I limited it to the best management practices because David will be talking about the watershed-based planning efforts a little bit later. But if you're looking at putting in a specific project, you're going to be needing to do designs and engineering, securing any and all permits. You'd have to develop a 10-year operation and maintenance plan on how that practice is going to be maintained and protected so it's functioning the way that you've designed it. We have BMP forms and pollutant load reduction calculations that have to be submitted before we give you approval to go ahead and construct the plan. BMP implementation only occurs after the design approvals. Then you've got quarterly reporting that are Gata forms, and basically this is every 90 days from the start of your contract period to the end of the contract period, and it reports what you physically have accomplished on the project. If you're having any struggles or any opportunities that we should know about, and then also where your status is on financial reporting. And the Gata forms are a little bit cumbersome, and I spend many a day telling people that I really don't like those forms, and I still really don't like those forms, but I'm required to use them, and so therefore any of our grantees are also. There's also invoicing that would be occurring. Invoicing can occur no more frequently than monthly, but basically we have to have at least one invoice every state fiscal year, and it just depends. Some groups invoice quarterly, some invoice monthly, some invoice just once a year. There's final reporting requirements with photos, pre-photos, and after that. And the last line on this for everybody to remember is that the Section 319 program is a reimbursement of eligible costs. So you do not get the money up front. You have to do the work and report it before we will make a payment back to you. And in a good year, when everything is flowing well, reimbursement time probably takes about 6 to 8 weeks for an average grantee. Some can accomplish it sooner. Some of them take a little bit longer. Okay. So the Section 319 grant program is basically available statewide. The priorities, again, from US EPA standpoint, who gives us the money to do this work is 4 priority watersheds and watershed-based planning areas. The state allocation that we've had in the past is about $4.5 million. This might go up because federal funding right now is like a roller coaster. So I don't know if the 319 program is going to increase or not. So for right now, we'll just assume $4.5 million for the entire state. Grant range anywhere from $20,000 to $1.2 million. For those that are in the $20,000 range, again, I really encourage you to go back and look at the Gata requirements and make sure that you're really getting your money's worth of the grant for $20,000 compared to what you might be spending on getting through the Gata process. The maximum grant award on average years is about $1.5 million. And the reason for that, again, is we've got $4.5 million for the entire state. So if we, give 3 projects $1.5 million, that leaves about 45 applicants out there that just get nothing. The minimum match requirement is 40%. Project length is normally about 24 months. We can go up to about 30 months on special circumstances. That's something that you'd want to put into your application. The eligible projects, watershed-based planning or development, watershed-based implementation, and this does include total maximum daily loads or TMDLs. And if you don't know what those are, again, reach out to us and we can give you more information on that. The practices that are eligible for 319 include Nonpoint Source Pollution Control, BMPs. And this excludes best management practices that are required by state or federal law. So again, learn what Nonpoint Source Pollution is, look at your project, and again, make sure that your project lines up with Nonpoint Source issues, because if you come in with a flood issue or a habitat issue, we're going to say, hey, that's a really nice program, but it's not going to receive enough priority and it's not going to get funded. Eligible costs for the 319 program: administrative and planning, design and engineering, construction all the way through planting, construction oversight to see that the practice is put in the way that it's supposed to, education and outreach, and both social and environmental monitoring, as long as you have a quality assurance program plan in place. Okay, so priority watersheds for Section 319, there's 51 hydrologic unit code watersheds identified on these two maps. And every one of these watersheds is a priority for either planning or for plan implementation once every 5 years. So the map on the left is the federal fiscal year 2023 priorities, which the application deadline is this August for 2022, give or take a few days. The map on the right is for next year's project. So if you aren't ready to run at this application in the next 60 to 90 days, look at 2024 and see where you fit into the priorities here. Now, it's a priority. It doesn't mean that if your watershed isn't highlighted that there's no chance that you get funding. We look at the quality of the applications and rank them out first that way on, are they going to control non-point source pollution? Are they going to make a difference? And then if we've got comparable projects, we compare and pick the one that's in a priority watershed for if they're proposing watershed-based planning, if they're in a green watershed for that year, or if they're implementing BMPs or again, other components of a watershed-based plan, if they're in the purple watershed there. But we don't know who's going to apply. So if you determine that you're only going to apply in the year that your watershed is eligible for that, you've reduced your chances by at least 80%, if not 95%, because you are assuming that everybody else is all on board and getting this all done. Okay. Again, the Section 319 program, priority one really is watershed-based plan implementation. Again, outreach, monitoring, and planning, and the best management practices. And again, for best management practices, designs and engineering, we need either a Illinois certified professional engineer or a USDA Natural Resources Conservation staff person that signs off on those practices. We need the forms and the pollutant load reduction calculations for those practices so that we can report back to US EPA how much sediment, how much nitrogen, and how much phosphorus have not entered an Illinois lake or stream due to putting the grant funds on the ground. We require at least a 10-year operation and maintenance plan. If the BMPs are a longer design lifespan, we may look at a longer operation and maintenance plan. And again, Bmp implementation only occurs after Illinois EPA approves the designs and the appropriate permits are secured. Okay. The types of best management practices, we have both rural and urban practices that are eligible. They are very comparable. I'm not going to read through the list here, but you've got a good list here of a lot of different ones that the majority of people go ahead and implement. But you can also look to the Illinois Nonpoint Source Management Program for additional eligible best management practices. And it's really important that the practices that you choose to recommend for implementation are site-specific, and you're not just saying, hey, we're going to implement this best management practice because it's on the list and we know we have a problem here. The practice really needs to be designed for the existing problem that you have, and it should also, whenever possible, take into account other benefits that you might be able to accomplish while you're accomplishing non-point source pollution control. So, is it going to help reduce flooding downstream? Is it going to help with habitat improvement? See if you can accomplish multiple benefits. But the other thing is, don't sell your project on the secondary benefits of flooding and habitat improvement. Sell your project on what its non-point source pollution control benefits are going to be. Okay. With Bmp implementation, be sure that you secure your technical assistance at the beginning of your project. Know what your operation and maintenance needs are going to be. We've had a number of projects, especially in urban areas, where the group that was putting the project in really didn't understand what the vegetation was going to look like or what was going to be needed. And they did a group of rain garden implementation and found that a lot of the neighbors were very unhappy with it. And when no one was looking, the neighbors went in and basically mowed right over all of the vegetation that had been installed. So it's more important for you at the beginning of the project to make sure that the projects or the practices are acceptable to the neighbors and are functioning right before you do that. And operation and maintenance needs will help you figure out how to do that. Consider areas upstream and downstream of the site. You may be undoing or redoing something that someone else has done. So talk to your neighbors and get involved with them. Secure your permits. Getting a grant from Illinois EPA does not replace any permits that are required. Again, consider the potential secondary benefits. Implement according to the designs, although change can happen, and we have some ways to handle that. Say you're putting a waterway in and you get down all the way to the bottom and find that somebody had inadvertently used that area to bury a lot of concrete or other materials. Maybe there's some extra costs that you hadn't planned on. We try to figure out how to adjust the design so it doesn't cost you more money and the practice goes in the way that it was proposed to Illinois EPA and what we proposed to US EPA. You need to be planning to operate and maintain the best management practice throughout its lifespan. If the BMP is going on another, say a private property, you've got to have the landowner's agreement on there that either you can go in and operate and maintain it, or they are going to do it themselves. And then promote the best management practices to your family, your friends, your neighbors, people you know, people you don't know, because one of the starting points of the Section 319 program was that this would be demonstrating best management practices so that other people would go ahead and consider implementing them. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to David right now to give you some more in-depth information on watershed-based planning.
Okay, so moving on to watershed-based planning and development or update. So this is 319. This is priority 2, so it's another element to the program. Watershed-based plan development or update really is stakeholder driven. If you don't have the community involved, it's really not going to be a good watershed-based plan, how it's developed, no matter how much technical expertise, how much planning or anything like that you put into it. You have to have the community behind you and be communicating with them to actually really understand what's going on. So it's really stakeholder driven. You need a technical advisory committee that's going to be essentially your panel of experts that are going to be helping out with the planning facilitation, which would be identified as, it could be a soil and water conservation district, or it could be a subcontractor. Identifying the size of the planning area is kind of an important thing for watershed-based plan. If you don't know what you're planning for, then it's, well, not really a plan. Plan lifespan is around about 10 years, generally on 10 years. Once it gets past that 10 years, really it's more appropriate to be looking at an update for the plan to just make sure that what significant changes have taken place in the areas, changes in land ownership, changes in impairments, and just a number of things. Watershed Resource Inventory Plan, that's going to be the science behind it. So that'll be essentially the justification of, hey, why does this all need to be done? And then the executive summary is pretty much just summarizing the gist of the overall watershed-based plan as it's developed or the update. So there's 9 elements identified that are necessary for a watershed-based plan. Identification of causes and sources, estimating the load reductions expected, maybe looking at a TMDL or other information for it, but description of best management practices, as Chris went through them. It's also appropriate to identify whether you're in a urban or a rural area, because if you're recommending best management practices that are generally for rural and you're in an urban area, then you're probably going to need some really good justification for why that is the best practice in order for it to be reasonable. Estimating the needed technical and financial assistance. You're not going to succeed unless you have that technical know-how, you understand what you need to know technically and what you need financially. Information and education component. This can be meet and greets, just a discussion of what's going on in the watershed, information or education on why the plan is actually needed, the causes and sources, identifying the causes and sources to the community or to different groups to that might be supporting it, the plan either financially or technically. So it's really just getting the information out there to allow everyone to be more educated about what's going on, why it's needed, and the benefits of it down the road. Measurable milestones, and then your criteria to measure success. Well, monitoring component is necessary. And really, if you're missing any of these in a watershed-based plan and or update, then it's not really going to go anywhere. There's not a whole lot we can do unless that's corrected. These are elements that have been identified by the US EPA as being necessary to watershed-based plans. So plan details, you're looking at developing maps and narratives, outlining the watershed boundaries, having maps showing the geology, the climate, soils, identifying jurisdictions within the planning area, understanding who you need to talk to, who owns what, who has a legal right to actually make the decision if the plan can actually be implemented in the area. Demographics, that's pretty useful in understanding just who you're talking to and how to present the information to the people, stakeholders, and whomever else is involved. Land use and land cover, watershed drainage systems, water quality assessment. A lot of that you're going to be looking at, say, like the 303D list in the integrated report for the assessed waterways in Illinois. Identifying critical areas, and then identifying site-specific BMPs, outlining what BMPs are going to be the most effective for addressing the impairments in specific areas. Existing documents can be used. There's a lot of different maps out there. There's a lot of different information out there that can be tapped into, so you don't have to just reinvent the wheel for everything. Looking at past planning, understanding the past conservation practices within the watershed area, within the planning area. That goes back to evaluating whether you're helping or hurting, undoing something or redoing something, or something that's just not been addressed before. PMDL, that's going to tell you your pollutant loads. That's what you're going to be identifying your load reductions off of. The integrated report, as I mentioned earlier, that goes over a lot of the water quality, a lot of the assessed areas. So that's where you'll be drawing your information on the impaired. GIS for maps, of course. Use your watershed planning meetings to talk to the stakeholders, talk to the community. A lot of times they are the first line of defense. They know what's going on in their backyard. They're going to be able to tell you things that maybe a scientist has missed or just doesn't grasp the concept of, oh, this is actually a problem in this area. So it allows you to address relevant issues. Stream watershed surveys and partner efforts are also different sources to use. So benefits of watershed-based plan, money is one of them. State and federal organizations look to local plans for project ideas to fund. In order for the BMP plans to be implemented, it's usually preceded by a watershed-based plan. The watershed-based plan identifies those BMPs that are needed in the area, and then that lets us know, hey, these are projects that we would actually fund those areas. Illinois EPA, the Section 319 grant program, DNR, DOA, and DCO Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, and then there's all sorts of local partners that, including municipalities, counties, private foundations that will also look to fund projects that are identified within a watershed-based plan. Another benefit is promoting effective and efficient projects. They can, when they're well planned, they can resolve multiple stakeholder issues. That goes back to the talk to the community. Don't just develop a plan and leave the community out of it. Where you're doing not just a disservice to the community, but you're really going to be missing a lot of the important issues within those areas. Watershed-based plan will also provide detailed information about the critical areas, and going back to the identifying the BMPs allowed, the ones that are allowed in watersheds stakeholders. It allows them to think outside of the box and to pretty much look for where they can get the technical and financial assistance. So the success of watershed-based planning, if you haven't caught on yet, it largely depends on stakeholder involvement. This is a voluntary program, so the community is, landowners aren't forced into the program. So they need to be involved if you want their cooperation. They need to be informed. They need to have transparency back and forth with them, and be allowed to communicate what their problems are that they see in the areas, so that they can be addressed within the allowances of the plan. Clear understanding of planning areas and identification of causes and sources. The watershed resource inventory, as I said earlier, is really going to be your science behind it. That's going to help to give you a lot of that clear understanding. It's going to also generate the ability to communicate scientifically and with data why the issues need addressed, what issues need addressed, and what are the problems within the planning area. 303D list, that's just assessed streams. That's a good place to start, but really the watershed resource inventory goes quite a bit past just looking at the 303D list. Determining the need of technical and financial assistance. If you don't have a good grasp of that, then you're not going to have a successful watershed-based plan. On both accounts, if you don't have the technical assistance to actually develop the plan and or update the plan, it's going to go nowhere fast. If you don't have financial assistance, and nothing's going to move financially. I mean, people still need paid for their time, money, projects need paid for, and all of that. And then last of all, which is not the least important of it, it's equally important, is timely submission of all required forms. Waiting until the last minute is probably the fastest way that you're going to fill a plan. Just be prompt and on time with it. I'll give you back to Chris.
Thanks, David. And the timely submission of all required forms, it really is an important thing. We've had Section 319 applications that were minutes late to be submitted, and according to our notice of funding opportunity, they were not reviewed because we identified that we would not be funding anything or reviewing anything for funding that was after the deadline. And the new Amplifund system, I believe, if I understand it correctly, is if you are in the system and the deadline comes up, it just takes away the opportunity for the submit button. Okay, so Illinois approved watershed-based plans. We've got about 130 of them in the state right now. The map that you're looking at there, the blue watersheds are under development. The green watersheds are approved and have been improved within the last 10 years. And the red watersheds that are there are older than 10 years and are appropriate for an update. So if there is already a watershed-based plan effort out there or group, I'd encourage you to work with somebody that's already been doing the planning to build off of the experience and the work that's already been done versus potentially creating a new plan that would be in conflict with part of the watershed stakeholders. And watershed-based planning on its best day can provide conflicts because everybody is looking at the water resources from a different angle. Somebody might be looking at it from drinking water supply, somebody else might be looking at it from recreation. Then you've got landowner rights and issues and people being concerned that they're being made to do something that they don't want to do. Again, watershed-based planning implementation is voluntary, so you need to come up in your watershed-based plans different ways that you can inform and educate stakeholders, and then possibly provide incentives to them to take the actions that need to happen there. The 3 documents over to the right are 3 examples of watershed-based plans that have happened in the last few years. We've got the Lower Salt Creek Watershed-based Plan up in DuPage County. I think Pond Creek is up in Lake County, and the Lake Springfield Watershed, which is here in Sangamon County. Regarding tips for successful Section 319 applications, the successful applicants know what they plan to do and they capture it in their application. So groups that have already gone through the watershed-based planning process are going to struggle less than somebody that has a single project and is trying to justify what they're going to be able to accomplish with, say, one wetland versus another applicant that's coming in saying, hey, we've done our planning and we know that the sequence of practices should go in this order. And you document that in the application saying, hey, we've done our planning. We've identified what the pollutant load reductions are. We've got a landowner that's ready to do the work. We've got partners that are bringing things to the table. And they write that in the application. When you're writing your application, assume that me as a grant reviewer, grant application reviewer, knows absolutely nothing about what you're talking about. I'd rather have you insult me and me think that you think that I know nothing, and you write enough in your application so that when I'm assuming that you know nothing, you're proving to me that you do know something about what you're doing. That was a really big, odd circular sentence there. But bottom line is, as a reviewer of grant applications, in my mind, this is my money. I've been working with this program for 30 years, and I only want to give it to people that are actually going to do the right thing as effective and as efficient as possibly. So you guys have to fight me for this money. And again, you have to prove that you know all of the steps that are going to be taken. Don't assume that everybody knows that there's 5 steps in a process, and so you only give me 3 of them, because I'm going to assume that you don't know about the other 2 steps, and therefore you're going to fail. So prove to me that you have the ability to do it versus assuming that I'm going to be generous, because the people that work this program with me know that I'm not generous. We award the people that have done their due diligence, okay? So now regarding successful applications, we don't have enough money for the state of Illinois to do all of the work that needs to be done. Many good applications do not get funded, and bad applications for sure do not get funded. And the reasons that a number of the bad applications have not gotten funded is they miss the point of the notice of funding opportunity. When you're looking at the grant that we have out there, we post a notice of funding opportunity that says, here's the funding source, here's the reason and what we're trying to accomplish it. There's criteria in the back of the notice of funding opportunity that says, we're going to judge your application on this. So as you're writing up your application, take the notice of funding opportunity, and as you answer a narrative question, go back and look at the criteria, say 1 through 10, and see if the narrative that you just wrote up answers the questions in that. And our questions are going to be things like, does this address the mission of the notice of funding opportunity? Is watershed-based planning being developed, or is watershed-based plan implementation happening? So if you're implementing a set of terraces and waterways and things like that, or a permeable pavement parking lot, you should be starting out your application, if you have a watershed-based plan, saying, according to the such and such watershed-based plan, it's been recommended that we install such and such practice, and you give all of the information that the plan has already created for you. So again, make sure that you understand what the notice of funding opportunity is. Don't try to squeeze your project into a program that it wasn't meant to fit in, because it's painful for you to try to write it. It's painful for us to have to review it. And we do, even though I sound mean on occasion, I really do feel bad when I tell people that we aren't able to fund them, okay? In this case, the second bullet I have here is that applicants didn't sign the application or the documents. Now, hopefully the Ample Fund and the Gata portal is going to take care of this and not allow you to submit something if you haven't accomplished all of the things that it's asked for. So if the deadline for this application ends up being August 1st, do not wait until July 15th to start to put your application together. Go in, open up the notice of funding opportunity when it's available, and we will be sending notifications out by email letting everybody know when the notice of funding opportunity is posted. But as soon as you can, go in and open up the notice of funding opportunity, open up the documents that are required, and come up with a game plan on how you're going to fill out all of that information. Are you the only one that's filling it out? Do you have partners that are going to be filling out different pieces of it, or coworkers? Maybe the financial stuff being done by your fiscal group. See what you need so that you aren't surprised at the end with only 15 minutes left to click the submit button and realize that there's a whole document that just didn't get done. We love paper at the state, so there's going to be a lot of questions. There's going to be a lot of documentation because, again, you're competing against other people to get these funds. Didn't provide enough information or the correct information. Have somebody that doesn't necessarily know what your project is read over your application for you. The Amplifund system allows you to print out a PDF version of what you've put together. Somebody that doesn't know anything about what you're doing, because sometimes if you're too close to the application or the project, you miss seeing things that are missing, or you missing things that shouldn't be in there because in your mind you know what you wanted to write versus what you actually wrote. And I have personal experience on that where I'll go back and look at something and say, why in the world is that thing? Why did I write that in there? That didn't have anything to do with this project. It was me being busy trying to rush through something. And again, when we as application reviewers, we have to use your quality of application as one of the determining factors on how good you're going to be to work with over the next couple of years. Your application may have included ineligible costs or had expensive taste. Again, you're competing against other people. You've got things like indirect costs that are an eligible item, but if we have two projects that are almost exactly the same, say an acre of permeable pavement parking lot, and the BMP unit costs are similar, but one of the projects included extra salary for administration and extra fringe benefit type things, then they're going to come in less cost effective than the other one that didn't include those things. So you have to think carefully about if you want to include those or not. Some of the projects you have to include it, because if not, you're working on Saturdays and Sundays, not on the payroll, and that's not something that we want you to do as well. But just know that if there's ways to keep your costs down and still get a effective and efficient project, pursue that versus going for the Cadillac of administration and other things. Figure out how to bring your costs down, because again, you're going to be competing against somebody else that is going absolute bare bones, like I just want a steering wheel and four wheels on my car and I'm good. Okay. Included the operation and maintenance as an afterthought. We really can see, and when we're reading these applications, you know, I've been doing it for 30 years. You can tell if somebody's actually thought through their whole process, or if they've just repeated words for the sake of repeating words, or they just weren't ready on the concept there. Another thing that I'll identify is in the budget, if you don't know what your costs are actually going to be because you're not ready, really think through it, make some phone calls, see if you can come up with some costs. When we see applications that come in where they have very round numbers, you know, something is going to cost $100,000, something is going to cost $120,000. What that tells us is the person might have a ballpark of what they think it's going to cost. But if somebody else comes in with, you know, I've got the bid and it's $113,750.29, that is going to be somebody that we think is in a better place to be funded, has done more due diligence to get the application in place. I did have a person a number of years ago that recommended that anybody that was filling out a grant application, no matter what your costs are, always throw an odd set of cents to, because then it looks like you've actually run your numbers and done stuff. Most of the applicant reviewers are smarter than that trick. So again, you have to be showing your information in your project description, your project budget, and your scope of work on what all you're needing to do and what it's going to be costing there. So just know that we do have some ideas of what good information is and how it should all fit together. Now, resources that we have available, I've got two different tools right here. One of them is on the left side, which is the Resource Management Mapping Service. This is a GIS-based system that you can go in and look around your area. It's going to give you information on municipalities where conservation practice is already at, watershed-based planning, total maximum daily loads, a whole suite of different practices. It'll also show you roadways, topographic maps, political boundaries, you name it, it's there. We are creating a web map application that's going to be a simpler version than this that'll help you identify things like your water body name, the identification number that Illinois EPA uses and that we ask for in our application. And that will be included in the Notice of Funding Opportunity and the application forms. So hopefully you can click on it and fill the information in there. The right side of the page is our Watershed-based planning page. It's a little bit out of date, but it does include information about guidance documents for watershed-based planning. There's both an urban and a rural one. It does talk about the importance of how you go through the watershed-based planning process and how to look at things from an implementation standpoint. And it also includes a lot of the links to the currently approved watershed-based plans that are out there. So if you're a municipality in an area with a watershed-based plan, please go read the watershed-based plan, or at least skim it, looking for the area that the people have recommended practices in your area. So that again, in your application, you can come back and say, hey, according to the such and such plan, it was recommended that we put in permeable pavement parking lot, or bioswales, or green roofs, or whatever it is that you're looking at doing for the project. The other thing is we've got Nonpoint Source Pollution staff. We've got a group of 3. They're ready, willing, and able to help. And if you are ahead of the game putting your application together, we do offer the service of a cursory review of applications as our schedule allows and as our resources allow as well. So if you get your application done relatively early, you send it into the agency and say, hey, could you please take a look at this? We're going to be looking for gaps. We're going to be looking for poorly worded items, ineligible items, and other just information that we think is going to help you to do a better application. We send that information back out to you, and then you can go ahead and approve your application before it's submitted. Okay, we just went through a whole bunch of stuff here, and I'm going to turn it over to Lisa for questions and stuff, and with 6 minutes to spare.
Excellent, Chris. Thank you so much. This was incredibly helpful. Lots of information. And we do have several questions. The first one, there were some people who asked about MS4 permits. And can you tell us how communities with MS4 permits, how that permitting process might fit into the watershed planning process, how the funding might be collaborative, and how it might not be? So can you just kind of talk through how this is the same and different for the MS4 process?
Okay. So yeah, it's the 319 program was in place before the MS4 permit system came into place, and we've tried to evolve the program to benefit each other. So from an MS4, if you've got a community that is doing their MS4 permit work appropriately, which I hope everybody is, that information could be incorporated into the watershed-based plan to help, again, the stakeholders and the partners for that watershed to figure out what types of activities really need to happen in order to protect the surface and groundwater in that area. Now, the thing that's tricky about it is I had said right up front that anything that's required by state or federal law wouldn't be eligible for the 319 program. So if you're doing watershed-based planning, again, you can include the MS4 in the plan. That's not a problem. But if you're trying to use practices to meet your MS4 permit, those aren't going to be eligible under the Section 319 program unless the community has not specifically identified that practice as a way that they plan to meet their MS4 requirements. So if the community said, we're going to put a wetland at the corner of Main and First, as soon as they write that specific project into the MS4, then it's no longer eligible for the 319 program. The other thing with that is if the applicant is not the community or the required permittee, there's an opportunity for us to waive that, because again, it's somebody else doing the work, even though it's going to be benefiting the MS4 community. So that one's a little bit of a trickier question on it. The other thing that I'll say, and then I'll stop talking on this one, is if you were building a wetland to meet the minimum requirements for the MS4 community, but you designed it to not only meet their requirements, but to do some additional non-point source pollution control, say like stormwater runoff, the additional work over and above what was minimally required could be eligible for the 319 program that we would put in partial funding for the project. But that's something that if somebody has a question on that, it might be safest just to have a conversation with somebody in the non-point source unit or myself to start off with, to make sure that what you're pursuing is going to be an eligible item.
Perfect, thank you. Point of quick clarification. David, are you David Southern or Souther? Your last name is written in the email address. Don't.
Yeah, the email address is actually wrong.
Okay.
My last name is Souther.
Okay.
Sorry, David.
So it's Souther, like South with an ER
okay.
on it.
Okay.
No,
So
sorry.
take the N out of there. Otherwise, it's going to tell you that that's not a. You might get to someone, but they're not going to know what you're talking about.
Okay.
Good catch.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Time for, I think, a couple more questions. So someone asked, would you please give an example of capacity building eligible for funding?
Okay. Capacity building for funding, projects that we funded in the past includes the University of Illinois with the resource management mapping tool, so that we have this tool in place that anyone can go and use and find out where their water bodies are, what their impairments are, and better understand that. We've also done projects with the Prairie Rivers Network, probably 10 or 15 years ago, where they did a series of capacity building workshops for local and state partners, again, to better understand non-point source pollution and to go ahead and create systems and tools that are out there. So it could be a tool like something computer-wise, it could be an educational series or conference, things like that. But it needs to be focused on non-point source pollution and people that are needing to do something different, building their capacity in order to actually accomplish what they need to accomplish.
Great, thanks so much. Our next question is for on-the-ground engineered BMPs, and you talked a little bit about this as you continued, but what level of design plans are required at the time of application? Can they be more conceptual, or do they really need to be, we've got the diagrams, we've got the exact quotes, we know exactly what we want to do. What's kind of the sweet spot?
Yeah. The more you have, the better off you're going to be as far as competing against other groups as far as applications go. But we do have many successful 319 applications that get grant awards that they only have the conceptual project, and they in fact include the design work as part of their budget. So the more you can provide, if you end up having an application that's very similar to somebody else's and we're at the last $100,000 of funding that's going to be ranked out, if the projects are totally equal and one has more design information submitted, then we're going to go with the one that is closer to getting ready to go, because our grant awards, we only have 24 to 30 months in order to get all of the work done. So if the design work is built into that 24 to 30 months, we also have rain, we have staffing changes, we have a lot of things that people aren't anticipating as being a problem in their future that shows up. So, but if you have an idea, I would encourage you to go ahead and submit it, even if you don't have significant designs done, because again, we don't know who's going to apply. Who I frustrated last year, and they just said, the heck with Illinois EPA, we're not going to mess with this, or maybe we're going to wait and apply for the Green Infrastructure Grant Opportunity Program, or maybe they're getting funding from many different potential federal funding sources. So the only thing that I can tell you for sure about applications that I know is that if you don't apply, you will not get funded. That is the only absolute that I know.
Excellent. That is good advice. And a poll question should have just come up for you. So if you'll give us a little information. We have a couple more quick questions. I know many of you are going to have to sign off, but Chris and David, would you mind just staying on for a few more minutes and answering just 2 more questions for posterity?
Absolutely.
So when does IEPA anticipate the watershed-based planning webpage will be updated with postings for watershed-based plans completed and approved since 2020, since December of 2020?
Sorry. I have to admit to my self-named nickname of Bottleneck Chris. It's on a list with a number of other things. So I'm hoping that within the next 6 months, we're going to have many things updated. We've had a significant staff change in the Nonpoint Source unit. The staff are learning the programs and are getting involved up to their eyeballs. And we've had projects that are being run that are now wrapping up, which is going to allow me to get back to some of the things that I'm supposed to be working on, including updating the webpage. But if I have to choose between making sure a grant award gets totally funded and implemented and updating our webpage, I've been going with the actual grant awards.
That seems reasonable. All right, thanks. Last question. If an older Clean Lakes program phase 1 diagnostic feasibility study plan or a phase 2 implementation report, which includes additional BMP recommendations, is not included in the list of watershed-based plans on IEPA's website, what would the next steps be?
For that lake, I would look to see if there is a watershed-based plan or a TMDL, total maximum daily load document that covers that same area. The lake diagnostic feasibility studies and reports, the last one was probably done well over 10 years ago. So from US EPA's perspective and Illinois EPA's perspective, even though there's very good information in the report, it doesn't capture the 9 elements of a watershed-based plan. So what the person might want to do is, again, see if there's already a plan out there that they can link the 2 documents together. I'm not saying that they shouldn't use the information in the diagnostic feasibility study. It's probably still very good and relevant information, but they need to supplement it with more recent information. And again, where US EPA is going with the 319 program is to avoid a Band-Aid approach or a in-water body approach where the watershed is continuing to deliver problems. So we don't want to be spending our money in the water body and have all of the good work that is paid for undone because the watershed hasn't been protected as well.
Excellent, thank you. And just one final question before we close. For those of us waiting to hear back, if our grant was accepted, they applied late last year, when should they expect some notification?
I'm hopeful that we will get the notifications out within the next 2 weeks. And again, this is solely on my shoulders as far as trying to get this done. With trying to put the grant award into the AMPLA fund process, it is taking quite a bit more work, but we do want to give anybody that isn't approved for funding from last year's application more than sufficient time if they want to go ahead and reapply for the program. So the intent was always to have the notification out before the notice of funding was released. It's just gotten tangled up in my bottleneckness. So.
And our intent certainly was not to point fingers, Chris. I know we've all got more work than we know how to get done. So we appreciate all your.
Oh, absolutely. And actually, as it was pointed out to me a long time ago during a watershed-based planning effort, when you point a finger at someone else, there's 3 fingers pointing back at yourself. So
fair enough.
I'm the target on this one. It is my responsibility, and I do get that people really can't do anything until they know what's going on. The good news, though, is on the AMPLA fund system, there should be an opportunity for cutting and pasting into it. So if somebody has submitted an application in the last year and they weren't selected for funding. There's, you know, and they have a similar project to what they were proposing last time. It's quite possible that they'll be able to cut and paste right out of last year's application into parts of this year's application. And we really did ask a lot more questions that will hopefully reduce some parts of the narrative. So you can have people out there that say they didn't apply last year and they just want to go ahead and do it, and they know that they you know, want to apply. They can go ahead and start thinking of the questions of, you know, what does this have to do with non-point source pollution, or what are the steps in order to do this project, and start typing that information into a Word document. And then when they see the final questions and are ready to put it into the application, again, they would be able to copy and paste from the work that they've already done, while they weren't panicking and weren't trying to rush through the process there. But yeah, we'll get there.
Yep, exactly. Well, thank you, Chris and David, so much. This is incredibly helpful. We appreciate your time, and I appreciate all of you who have joined us today for this webinar. And we will be back in a few months to talk more about funding opportunities and water quality programs from Illinois EPA.
Well, thank you everyone for attending as well. I appreciate it. And you know where to find us. So once you've got David's correct email address, which is no end, but please reach out to us if you have any questions. That's what we're here for.
All right. Thanks so much. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks. You too.